Welcome to Echoes of Ihsan. You know we love those deep dives into Islamic history and thought. And today, we're going way back to the very beginning to see how Tarawih prayers evolved. You know Tarawih, right? Those special night prayers during Ramadan. We'll trace how they went from individual acts of devotion to a practice that unites Muslims all over the world today. And to guide us on this journey, we're turning to the Muwatta Imam Malik, specifically Book 6, Prayer in Ramadan.
This text, it's really a gem, compiled way back in the 8th century by Imam Malik. It's one of the earliest collections we have of hadith, these sayings and practices of the Prophet Muhammad. It offers us such a valuable window into how the very first Muslims lived their faith.
Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Okay, but why? Why does this even matter to me? Well, think of it like this. When we understand the roots of Tarawih, we begin to appreciate its deeper meaning, and we connect with all those generations of Muslims who came before us. It's like uncovering a hidden layer of richness in something we might just take for granted.
It's about getting to the why, behind the what. And this whole journey beautifully illustrates the concept of Ihsan. You'll hear this term a lot as we go through this deep dive. It's often translated as excellence in faith, but it's so much more than that. Ihsan is about going above and beyond just the obligations. It's about seeking a deeper connection with God through voluntary worship. It's about putting sincerity and mindfulness into everything you do.
I love that. So let's start at the very beginning. We're going back to the time of the Prophet Muhammad to see how his actions and teachings laid the very foundation for the Tarawih prayers we know today.
The Muwatta tells us that the Prophet, peace be upon him, would lead these voluntary night prayers in the mosque during Ramadan. Can you just imagine being there? The soft glow of lanterns, the quiet whispers of prayer, and the Prophet, a true beacon of spiritual guidance, leading everyone. These prayers, though not yet called Tarawih, truly embodied that spirit of drawing close to God during this holy month.
I can almost feel it, but then something interesting happens. The mosque starts getting packed with people wanting to pray, with the Prophet. Like, seriously packed. You can't even find space to put down a prayer rug.
Exactly. And here's where we see the Prophet's wisdom and sensitivity, seeing these crowds grow and grow. He actually decided to stop leading those prayers publicly. He was worried that if he kept going, people might start to think these voluntary prayers were becoming mandatory. It's such a subtle but crucial difference.
It really is. The Prophet knew that true Ihsan comes from sincere devotion, not a feeling of obligation. He wanted people to engage in these prayers out of love, not out of fear of missing out or falling short.
Exactly. It's like a reminder that sometimes stepping back can actually be a form of leadership. By not leading the prayers out in the open, the Prophet preserved the voluntary nature of this worship. He let people decide how much they wanted to engage based on their own arts.
Even though the Prophet stopped leading these prayers publicly, did he ever discourage people from praying at night during Ramadan?
Oh, not at all. He still really emphasized the spiritual importance of these prayers. There's another hadith in the Muwatta where he encourages people to keep up those night prayers throughout Ramadan. He even promises forgiveness and huge spiritual rewards for those who pray with true faith and hope for God's mercy.
So it's this beautiful balance, right? Encouraging spiritual growth, but also respecting that each person has their own path. And emphasizing that the real reward is about your intention and your connection with God.
You got it. And here's what's so interesting. This whole practice of these voluntary night prayers, it didn't end after the Prophet passed away. The Muwatta actually tells us that it continued during the time of Abu Bakr, the very first caliph, and even into the beginning of Umar ibn Khattab's rule.
Wow. So this wasn't just like a random thing. In the Prophet's time, the early Muslims really embraced it. It was woven into how they observed Ramadan. But then we have Umar, known for his leadership and vision. He really seems to have shaped the Tarawih we know and love today, didn't he?
He did. Umar was very observant. He noticed people praying on their own or in small groups all throughout those Ramadan nights. Imagine it. The mosque, alive with all these quiet whispers, each person or little group completely immersed in their own world of prayer. This beautiful mosaic of devotion.
I can almost see it. This tapestry of individual prayers, each thread a personal connection with God. But you know what they say, there's strength in unity. And it seems like Umar sensed that too.
Exactly. Umar really felt that bringing everyone together behind a single voice, reciting the Qur'an, would make their spiritual experience even stronger. He believed it would cultivate a stronger sense of community and connection. during those special nights.
It makes sense. There really is something powerful about praying together, about feeling that energy of a community united by a shared purpose. But how did he even do it? Did everyone just follow along without any pushback?
Well, Umar chose Ubay ibn Ka'b, who was a very prominent companion of the Prophet, known for his deep understanding of the Qur'an, to lead those congregational Tarawih prayers. This was really the moment when Tarawih became a communal practice.
So with Umar's leadership, we see this shift happening from individuals or small groups praying to a unified congregation led by someone who really knew the Qur'an. It's like watching the puzzle pieces fall into place.
Yeah.
But did Umar just stop there?
Not at all. He was always looking for ways to improve things. And he had this really insightful observation he noticed, that while praying together was powerful, the later part of the night, closer to dawn, held even more blessings for those who were really yearning for that deeper connection with God.
So interesting. Even as he was championing this idea of praying together, he also acknowledged how important it is to have those individual, more intimate moments of reflections. It's like he was saying, yes, let's all come together, but don't forget the power of your own personal connection with God.
Absolutely. It's this delicate balance that Umar seemed to just instinctively understand. He didn't want to downplay those individual moments, even as he was establishing this communal practice.
It really shows us how multifaceted faith is, doesn't it?
Right.
We need those shared experiences and those individual journeys. It's not one or the other, it's both, like threads in a tapestry.
And really, we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore, especially about how Tarawih was practiced during Umar's time. We'll get into some really fascinating details in a bit.
We're back, ready to uncover more about how Tarawih was in Umar's time. I'm curious about what those prayers actually were like, what they sounded like.
You know, it's easy to think that Tarawih has always been exactly as we know it, but the Muwatta actually shows us some really interesting differences. Like the recitations, how long they were. I mean, imagine this, the reciter standing before everyone, his voice echoing through the mosque, reciting Surah al-Baqarah, the longest chapter in the whole Qur'an, for 8, maybe even 12 rakas.
12 rakas, just one chapter. That's amazing. People must have really been able to reflect, connect deeply with those verses. It's so different from how it is today in many mosques, where they try to recite the entire Qur'an over all the Tarawih prayers during the month.
It really is different, it seems like. Back then, during Umar's time, they focused more on really understanding a smaller part of the Qur'an, letting those verses really sink in to the congregation.
It makes you think about how we approach spiritual practices sometimes. Slowing down, really diving deep into one idea or one text can be more meaningful than trying to cover so much so quickly.
Right, and the Muwatta even gives us a clue about what people preferred back then and mentions that. If the reciter finished Surah al-Baqarah in 8 rakas, people were happy that it was shorter.
It shows us that, even in these acts of devotion, there are human limitations. They loved those longer recitations, that immersive experience. But they also knew that praying for so long could be physically demanding.
And get this, there's this other detail that might surprise you. The Muwatta mentions that during these prayers, they would actually curse disbelievers.
Wow. That's definitely different, especially today when we're all about interfaith dialogue, understanding each other. It seems a little harsh compared to the spirit of
compassion and mercy that we usually associate with Ramadan.
It's important to remember the context.
Yes.
You know, those early Muslims, they lived in a time of so much conflict, persecution. They were constantly facing threats to their very existence.
So these curses, maybe they were an expression of the fear, the anxiety that they were living with. Maybe it was their way of asking for God's protection, expressing their deep longing for peace and safety in a world that felt so uncertain.
Right. It reminds us that religious practices don't exist in a bubble. They're shaped by what's happening in the world, the social and political realities of the time. If we understand the context, it helps us to see things through a lens of empathy, even if we don't agree with those practices. Today, it encourages us to think more deeply about history, not to judge too quickly. It's about realizing that what might seem strange or even offensive to us now might have meant something completely different to people back then.
Exactly. It's about trying to understand rather than condemning. Ready for a few more glimpses into how Tarawih was during Umar's time.
Oh, definitely. I'm trying to picture myself there, back in those early days, taking it all in.
Okay, so picture this. Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr, the son of the first caliph. He's just finished Tarawih prayers, and his servants are rushing to serve food. They're worried that dawn is about to break.
That's a pretty late dinner, you can tell, these prayers. They weren't just a quick thing. They took up a big part of the night, dedicated to worshiping and reflecting.
And here's another detail that I just love. The Muwatta tells us that Aisha, the Prophet's wife, would have her freed slave, Zakwan Abu Amir, lead her in prayer during Ramadan.
That is so beautiful. It really shows us that spirit of equality, humility, that's so central to Islam. Here's Aisha, such a respected woman, choosing to be led in prayer by someone who was once her slave.
It reminds us that true piety has nothing to do with your social status, your wealth. It's all about your devotion, your sincerity in the eyes of God.
It's amazing how these little details can give us such a rich understanding of the early Muslims, what they valued. It makes me appreciate this tradition even more, its depth, its complexity.
So we've gone from the Prophet encouraging those voluntary night prayers to Umar taking charge, unifying those prayers, refining them into what we know as Tarawih today. But there's still something missing, don't you think? We've talked about what they did and how they did it, but what about why? What does all this tell us about the true essence of Tarawih and how it connects to this idea of Ihsan?
That is the question, isn't it? And it's a question we'll keep exploring as we delve deeper into the Muwatta and reflect on what these early accounts really mean. Thinking back on all these stories about Tarawih, what stands out to me is how much it's about personal devotion, striving for that excellence in faith, even when you're praying with a whole community. It's not just going through the motions. It's about that deep connection with God.
It's the heart of Ihsan, right? Putting your whole heart into every act of worship, sincerity, mindfulness, wanting to please God. Think of it this way. Ihsan is what drives the evolution of Tarawih. It's that invisible thread connecting everything. From the Prophet's encouragement to Umar's vision of praying together and beyond.
I love that image. Ihsan is this seed that grows into this magnificent tree of tradition. We see it, and how the Prophet guided people, encouraging them, but never forcing them. We see it in Umar, so observant, seeing the need for unity, but also individual reflection.
And we even see it in the little details, how they prayed, this long recitations, praying so late into the night, that freed slave leading the prayers. Those details, they tell a story. They're not just random facts. They show us how deeply committed they were to drawing closer to God as individuals and as a community.
How does this connect to us today? What can we learn from these echoes of Ihsan that have come down through all these centuries? How can we apply all of this to our own Ramadan?
That's the question, isn't it? The question we should all be asking. Maybe it starts with realizing that there's no one right way to do Tarawih or any act of worship, just like not celebrating Muslims. Adapted to their own circumstances, we can find our own ways to connect with the spirit of Ramadan in a way that speaks to us, our own needs, our aspirations.
It's about honoring tradition, but also making it our own. What works best for us? Do we feel that connection through longer recitations or shorter, more frequent prayers? Are we drawn to the energy of a crowded mosque or the stillness of praying at home? The important thing is to be present, mindful, to approach our worship with that spirit of Ihsan. And don't forget, Ihsan isn't about being perfect. It's about always striving, looking for ways to improve that connection with God. It's about that question. How can I be more present, more sincere, more devoted? How can I make this Ramadan truly transformative?
This has been such a powerful reminder, that Tarawih. It's so much more than just a ritual. It's a living tradition, woven together with history, devotion, and that constant pursuit of Ihsan. As we get ready for this coming Ramadan, let's keep all of this in our hearts. Let's approach our prayers, our charity, our whole Ramadan experience with that same spirit of excellence and faith.
So beautifully said.
Amen.
Oh, maybe. As we listen to those echoes of Ihsan from the past, we can create our own echoes, echoes that will reach into the future to inspire generations to come.
Thank you for joining us today. As we explored the evolution of Tarawih, we hope you've come away with a deeper understanding and a deeper appreciation for this incredible tradition. Until next time, may your reflections be insightful and your Ramadan filled with blessings.